At 09:15 on the morning of November 7, 1944, Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers sat in the driver's seat of his M4 Sherman tank, 400 yards from the German-held town of Guebling, France. He was 25 years old, from Tecumseh, Oklahoma, a tank commander with the 761st Tank Battalion. Around him, 5 other Shermans from Able Company were positioned in a skirmish line, engines idling, waiting for the order to advance. Ruben gripped the controls, his hand steady despite the German 8A Bombardier tank gun positioned somewhere in the woods ahead that had already destroyed 2 American tanks that morning. The 761st had been in continuous combat for 8 days. They were exhausted, low on ammunition, and facing an enemy that had been told by their own officers that these American tankers would run at the first sign of real fighting. The reason the Germans believed this was simple: every man in the 761st Tank Battalion was black, and in November 1944, both the German military and significant portions of the American military believed black soldiers lacked the courage, intelligence, and discipline for sustained combat. 3 months earlier, the 761st Zone Commanding General George S. Patton had stood on the hood of a Jeep and told 700 black tankers that he didn't care what color they were as long as they killed Germans, but that everyone was watching, waiting for them to fail. Patton had requested white tank battalions. He had been told to take the 761st or go without armor support. He took them reluctantly. Now, 8 days into combat, Ruben Rivers and the 761st were about to prove every racist assumption wrong. They would fight for 183 consecutive days. They would liberate over 30 towns. They would help free concentration camps. They would become one of the most decorated units in Patton's Third Army. And they would not receive proper recognition for 33 years. This is their story. The story of men who were never supposed to fight, who fought anyway, and who were forgotten by the country they bled for. If you want to see how a black tank battalion that General Patton didn't want became his most decorated unit, fought for 183 days straight, freed concentration camps, and then was ignored for 33 years, hit that like button. This is the story the Army tried to bury. This is the 761st Tank Battalion. Subscribe, because their courage deserves to be remembered. Back to Ruben. The 761st Tank Battalion was activated on April 1, 1942, at Camp Claiborne, Louisiana. The unit designation was deliberate. 761st placed it far down the numerical list, away from the prestige units with lower numbers. The mission was experimental and controversial. The U.S. Army had resisted creating black combat units. Military leadership believed black soldiers were suitable only for labor and support roles. Decades of racist pseudoscience and institutional prejudice had created a military doctrine stating that black men lacked the intelligence for technical roles like tank operation and the courage for frontline combat. But by 1942, the Army needed men. The draft was pulling millions into service, and the pool of white volunteers for dangerous roles was not infinite. Civil rights organizations, particularly the NAACP, had been pressuring the Roosevelt administration to allow black soldiers into combat roles. The compromise was the creation of a few experimental all-black combat units, including the 761st Tank Battalion. If these units failed, the Army could point to them as proof that integration was impossible. If they succeeded, the Army would find ways to minimize their accomplishments. The 761st began with approximately 750 men operating 36 M4 Sherman medium tanks, plus support personnel for maintenance, supply, and administration. Every enlisted man was black. The officers were a mixture. Most junior officers were black, promoted from the enlisted ranks, but the senior command staff was white. This was standard practice. The Army did not trust black officers to command at the battalion level. The white officers assigned to the 761st were, with few exceptions, men who had not been wanted by white units or men who saw the assignment as a dead end for their careers. The best white officers went to white units. The 761st got what was left. Training began in May 1942. The 761st trained on the M5 Strort light tank initially, then transitioned to the M4 Sherman medium tank in 1943. The Sherman was the primary American tank of World War, 30 tons, armed with a 7mm main gun, capable of 25 miles per hour, crewed by 5 men. The Sherman was reliable but outgunned by German tanks. German Panther and Tiger tanks had heavier armor and more powerful guns. American doctrine compensated with numbers and mobility. The 761st would need both. The men of the 761st came from across America, but predominantly from the South. Ruben Rivers was from Oklahoma. Other men came from Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Georgia. They had grown up under Jim Crow. They had attended segregated schools, been denied the right to vote, been subjected to daily humiliation and violence. Many had enlisted in the army hoping military service would earn them respect, would prove they deserved equality. They trained for 2 years under segregated conditions. They lived in separate barracks at the edge of Camp Claiborne. They were forbidden from using facilities designated for white soldiers. When they received weekend passes, they were warned not to enter nearby towns where they would be arrested or worse. Local businesses refused to serve them. Local police harassed them. And yet they trained. They learned tank operations, gunnery, tactics, maintenance. They trained harder than most white units because they knew they would be judged more harshly. A white unit that failed would be blamed on poor leadership or bad luck. A black unit that failed would be blamed on race. By September 1944, the 761st was rated as combat ready. They were among the best trained tank units in the Army. Their gunnery scores exceeded those of many white battalions. Their commanders, even the skeptical white ones, admitted the men were competent. But the 761st remained in the United States while white units deployed to Europe. The Army did not want to deploy black combat units. The 761st waited at Camp Hood, Texas, watching white tank battalions with less training ship out. Finally, in August 1944, 2 months after D-Day, the Army relented. The 761st was ordered to Europe, not because the Army wanted them there, because casualties in France were so high that the Army had no choice. The 761st shipped out from New York in mid-September 1944, arriving in England in late September, then crossing to France in mid-October. They were assigned to General George S. Patton's Third Army. Patton was one of the most aggressive and controversial commanders in the U.S. military. He believed in rapid armored advances, in hitting the enemy hard and not stopping. He also believed black soldiers were inferior. Patton had specifically requested that no black combat units be assigned to his army. On October 10, 1944, Patton visited the 761st at their staging area in France. He climbed onto the hood of a jeep and addressed the battalion. His speech was recorded by multiple witnesses and later quoted in official histories. "Men, you're the first Negro tankers to ever fight in the American Army. I would never have asked for you if you weren't good. I have nothing but the best in my army. I don't care what color you are as long as you go up there and kill those Croat sons of bitches. Everyone has their eyes on you and is expecting great things from you. Most of all, your race is looking forward to your success. Don't let them down, and damn you, don't let me down." The speech was meant to be inspiring. It was also condescending and threatening. Patton made clear that the 761st was on trial. One failure would confirm every racist assumption. The men understood. They had been on trial their entire lives. The 761st entered combat on November 7, 1944, attached to the 26th Infantry Division near the town of Moenvic in northeastern France. Their mission was to support infantry in breaking through German defenses along the Maginot Line. The Germans had fortified the region heavily. Pillboxes, anti-tank ditches, minefields, and dug-in infantry waited. Intelligence estimated moderate resistance. Intelligence was wrong. At 09:15 a.m., Able Company 761st Tank Battalion advanced on the town of Guebling. Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers commanded the lead tank Taffy Tuin. Ruben was 25 years old, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, from Tecumseh, Oklahoma. He had enlisted in 1942, trained with the 761st for 2 years, and been promoted to staff sergeant for his leadership and technical skill. Now he was leading his company into its first combat action. The plan was simple: advance 400 yards across open ground, engage German positions with main gun fire, suppress resistance, allow infantry to follow. Simple plans rarely survive first contact. At 09 am, German 80mm anti-tank fire opened up. The 88mm gun was the most feared tank weapon in the war. It could penetrate a Sherman's armor from 1,000 yards. The first shot struck the lead tank of 2nd Platoon, 40 yards to Ruben's left. The shell penetrated the front glacis plate. The tank exploded. Ammunition inside detonated. The turret flew off. None of the crew survived. The second shot hit another Sherman 30 seconds later. Same result. 2 tanks destroyed in 30 seconds. The German gun was firing from concealed position in the woods 600 yards ahead. The remaining tanks could not see it. They were sitting targets. Ruben made a decision. He radioed his platoon. "Follow me. We're going after that gun." He accelerated. Taffy seed forward, moving at maximum speed toward the woods. The other tanks followed. German machine gun fire rattled off their armor. Ruben ignored it. Machine guns couldn't penetrate. The 88 could. Ruben had to close the distance, get into the woods where the 88 bomb would have less advantage. At 400 yards, the 88 bomb fired at Taffy Thui. The shell missed, passing inches over the turret. At 300 yards, the 88 bomb fired again. Another miss. Ruben was moving erratically, making himself a difficult target. At 200 yards, Ruben's gunner spotted the 88 bomb's muzzle flash. Ruben stopped the tank. The gunner aimed. The 75th Evans shell hit the 88 bomb's position directly. The German gun was destroyed. Ruben had led his platoon through enemy fire, destroyed a superior weapon, and opened the route for the infantry. The 761st's first combat action was a success. Ruben Rivers received no medal for this action. His after-action report was filed and forgotten. Over the next 8 days, the 761st fought continuously. They advanced through Moyenvik, Vic-sur-Seille, Morville, and Guebling. They destroyed German pillboxes, engaged enemy armor, supported infantry assaults. The fighting was brutal. German defenses were stronger than expected. The weather was terrible. Rain, mud, freezing temperatures. Tanks bogged down in mud. Visibility was limited. German forces fought desperately. The 761st lost men. Tanks were destroyed. Crews were killed. But they did not break. They did not run. Every racist prediction about black soldiers failing under fire was proven false. The men of the 761st fought as well as any unit in Patton's army. On November 16, 1944, 9 days into combat, the 761st participated in an assault on the town of Vic-sur-Seille. German forces had fortified the town with anti-tank guns and infantry. The assault required crossing open ground under fire. Ruben Rivers' tank led the advance again. At approximately 1:30 a.m., German anti-tank fire hit Taffy Thui on the right side. The shell did not penetrate the main armor but struck the suspension system, damaging the tracks and road wheels. The tank was immobilized. Ruben and his crew were exposed. German machine gun fire raked the disabled tank. Ruben ordered his crew to evacuate. They refused to leave him. Ruben climbed out of the tank under fire, inspected the damage, and determined the tank could be repaired in the field if they had time. Time they did not have. German infantry were advancing. Ruben made another decision. He told his crew to abandon the tank. He would cover their evacuation. His crew again refused. They stayed with him. Together, They fought off the German infantry for 40 minutes, using the tank's machine guns until reinforcements arrived. The tank was eventually repaired. Ruben and his crew survived. For this action, Ruben was recommended for the Silver Star. The recommendation was downgraded to a Bronze Star. No explanation was given. By mid-November, the 761st had been in continuous combat for 2 weeks. They had suffered casualties: 15 men killed, 32 wounded, 7 tanks destroyed. But they had accomplished their missions. The 26th Infantry Division commander sent a commendation to the 761st praising their performance. General Patton visited the battalion again. His tone had changed. He no longer questioned whether they would fight. He knew they would. But recognition remained limited. The 761st's accomplishments were noted in unit reports but not publicized. The Army did not want to draw attention to a successful black combat unit. It complicated the narrative that segregation was necessary. On November 18, 1944, the 761st was reassigned to the 103rd Infantry Division and tasked with advancing through the Lorraine region toward the German border. The offensive began on November 19th. The 761st led the attack. Over the next 10 days, they fought through heavily defended terrain. German forces had prepared fallback positions, anti-tank ditches, minefields. The weather worsened. Snow fell. Roads became impassable. Tanks had to operate cross-country, which was slower and more dangerous. Mines were hidden under snow. Several tanks were lost to mines. Crews were killed or wounded. But the 761st kept advancing. On November 19th, Ruben Rivers' tank was hit again. This time, a German anti-tank round struck the front glacis plate but failed to penetrate. The impact knocked Ruben unconscious for several minutes. When he regained consciousness, his crew wanted to evacuate him for medical treatment. Ruben refused. He said they were in the middle of an attack. Leaving would leave his platoon without leadership. He stayed in the tank and continued fighting. For 3 more days, Ruben commanded his tank despite headaches and blurred vision from the concussion. On November 21st, 1944, near the town of Guebling, France, the 761st was advancing toward German positions. Ruben Rivers' tank was in the lead as always. At approximately 4:30, German anti-tank fire struck the tank on the left side. This time the shell penetrated. The impact severed Ruben's left leg below the knee. The leg was hanging by tissue. Blood poured into the tank. Ruben's crew immediately tried to evacuate him. Ruben refused. He said the attack had to continue. He ordered his driver to keep moving, his gunner to keep firing. Ruben remained at his post, commanding the tank, while bleeding out. For 30 minutes, Ruben continued to direct his tank's fire, destroying 2 German positions. Then he lost consciousness from blood loss. His crew finally evacuated him. Medics worked on him at the aid station. They amputated the destroyed leg, but Ruben had lost too much blood. He died at 16:45 on November 21, 1944. He was 25 years old. He had been in combat for 14 days. Ruben's company commander immediately recommended him for the Medal of Honor. The recommendation included detailed accounts of his actions on November 7th, November 16th, and November 21st. Multiple officers and enlisted men provided witness statements. The recommendation was detailed, well documented, and met every criterion for the Medal of Honor. It was submitted through official channels. It was denied. The denial came without explanation. Ruben Rivers was posthumously awarded the Silver Star, not the Medal of Honor. The Silver Star is an honorable decoration, but it is not the nation's highest military honor. Ruben Rivers deserved the Medal of Honor. He did not receive it because he was black. The 761st continued fighting. Ruben's death did not stop them. They mourned him and kept advancing. By the end of November, they had fought for 24 consecutive days. They had liberated multiple towns. They had destroyed numerous German positions. They had proved themselves in sustained combat. and the army continued to minimize their accomplishments. On December 16, 1944, Germany launched its largest offensive of the war, the Battle of the Bulge. Over 200,000 German troops attacked through the Ardennes forest, attempting to split the Allied armies and capture the port of Antwerp. The offensive caught the Allies by surprise. American units were overrun. Entire divisions were surrounded. Patton's Third Army was ordered to pivot north and relieve the surrounded 1st Airborne at Bastogne. The 761st Tank Battalion was part of that relief force. The 761st moved north in brutal winter conditions. Snow, ice, freezing temperatures. Tanks struggled with traction, visibility was near zero. German forces were fighting desperately, knowing this was their last chance to turn the war. The 761st fought through German roadblocks, ambushes, and defensive positions. They lost men and tanks, but they kept moving. By December 31, 1944, they had reached the vicinity of Bastogne. The siege was broken. The 101st Airborne was relieved. The 761st had played a critical role in one of the most important battles of the war. Their contribution was noted in unit reports. It was not publicized. The official histories of the Battle of the Bulge, written immediately after the war, barely mentioned the 761st. When black units were mentioned at all, it was in passing, without detail. The 761st continued fighting through January, February, and March of 1945. They advanced through Belgium, Luxembourg, and into Germany. They fought in the Saar region, breaking through the Siegfried Line, Germany's western defensive fortifications. They crossed the Rhine River in late March. They pushed into central Germany in April. They fought for 183 consecutive days. This was one of the longest continuous combat deployments of any American unit in World War II. Most units were rotated out of combat for rest and refitting after 30 to 60 days. The 761st fought for 6 months straight. The reason was partly tactical. Patton needed every tank he could get. But it was also partly racial. The army was more willing to exhaust black units than white units, because command believed they were expendable. In early May 1945, as the war in Europe was ending, the 761st advanced into Austria. On May 5, 1945, elements of the 761st discovered the Gunskirchen concentration camp, a subcamp of Mauthausen. What they found was beyond comprehension. Thousands of prisoners, mostly Hungarian Jews, starving, diseased, dying, bodies piled in mass graves, survivors too weak to stand, the smell of death overwhelming. The 761st tankers, men who had seen combat for 6 months, men who had witnessed the worst of war, were horrified. They had been fighting to defeat Nazi Germany. Now they saw what Nazi Germany had been doing. Staff Sergeant E.G. McConnell, a tank commander with the 761st, later wrote about entering Gunskirchen. We had been fighting for 6 months. We had seen men killed, burned alive in tanks blown apart. But nothing prepared us for what we saw in that camp. Those weren't soldiers. They were civilians. Men, women, children, starved to skeletons. Some too weak to move. Others already dead, and I thought were black Americans. We know what it's like to be treated as less than human because of how we were born. But this was genocide. This was what we were really fighting against. The 761st helped liberate the camp. They provided food, medical assistance, and transport for survivors. They also ensured the camp was documented. Photographs were taken. Evidence was collected. The 761's role in liberating Gunskirchen was documented in their unit history, but when the official histories of concentration camp liberations were written, the 761st was rarely mentioned. The liberation of camps was attributed to white units. The 761's contribution was minimized or ignored. The war in Europe ended on May 8, 1945. The 761st Tank Battalion's combat record was extraordinary. 183 consecutive days in combat, 30 towns liberated, numerous German positions destroyed, participation in the Battle of the Bulge, breakthrough of the Siegfried Line. Liberation of a concentration camp. The battalion received numerous unit commendations from the divisions they supported. Individual soldiers received silver stars, bronze stars, and purple hearts. But the 761st did not receive the Presidential Unit Citation, the highest unit award given by the United States military. White tank battalions with less impressive combat records received Presidential Unit Citations. The 761st did not. The reason was race. The men of the 761st returned to the United States in mid-1945. They were given parades in some cities. They were told they were heroes. Then they returned to segregated America. They could not vote in the South. They could not eat in white restaurants. They could not attend white schools. Their military service had earned them nothing. Many used the GI Bill to attend college or buy homes, but they faced systematic discrimination in both. Southern universities refused to admit black veterans. Banks refused to give them loans. Employers refused to hire them at equal wages. The promise that military service would earn equality was broken. The men of the 761st tried to tell their story. They organized reunions. They wrote letters to newspapers. They contacted historians. Most were ignored. The official histories of World War II that were published in the 1950s and 1960s barely mentioned black units. When black soldiers were mentioned, it was often in the context of labor battalions, not combat units. The 761st combat record was filed away and forgotten. Decades passed. The men grew old. Many died without ever receiving proper recognition. In the 1970s, a few historians began researching black combat units. One was Dr. Mary Motley, who published Evil Soldier in 1975. The book documented the service of black soldiers in World War II, including the 761st. The book brought some attention to the battalion, but it was limited. The general public remained unaware. In 1978, a group of 761st veterans petitioned the Army to award the battalion the Presidential Unit Citation. They provided documentation, combat records, after-action reports, commendations from supported units. The Army reviewed the petition and denied it. The reason given was insufficient documentation. This was false. The documentation existed. The Army simply did not want to recognize a black unit's accomplishments 33 years after the fact. The veterans did not give up. They continued lobbying. They organized publicity campaigns. Finally, in 1978, pressure mounted. President Jimmy Carter intervened. On January 24, 1978, 33 years after the war ended, the 761st Tank Battalion was awarded the Presidential Unit Citation. The ceremony was held at the White House. Surviving members of the battalion attended. They were elderly men now, in their 60s and 70s. Many cried during the ceremony, not from joy, but from the weight of 33 years of being ignored. President Carter's citation read, "The 1st Tank Battalion distinguished itself by extraordinary heroism in action against an armed enemy from November 7, 1944 to May 6, 1945. The courage and devotion to duty demonstrated by members of the 761st Tank Battalion reflect great credit upon themselves and are in keeping with the finest traditions of the military service." But the recognition was incomplete. Individual soldiers who had been recommended for high decorations had never received them. Ruben Rivers, recommended for the Medal of Honor in 1944, had been given a Silver Star instead. Other soldiers had similar experiences. In the 1990s, the U.S. Army conducted a review of World War II medal awards. The review was prompted by research showing that no black soldier had received the Medal of Honor for service in the European theater. Historians demonstrated that this was statistically impossible unless racial discrimination had influenced the awards process. The Army commissioned a study. The study identified 7 black soldiers who had been recommended for the Medal of Honor, but downgraded to lesser awards. In 1997, President Bill Clinton awarded the Medal of Honor to these 7 men. 6 received it posthumously. Only one, Vernon Baker, was alive to receive his medal. Among the 6 posthumous recipients was Staff Sergeant Ruben Rivers of the 761st Tank Battalion. Ruben's medal was presented to his family 53 years after his death. His sister, Grace Woodson Rivers, accepted it. She was 89 years old. She said, "Ruben would have been proud. But he should have received this in 1945, not 1997. That's 52 years of dishonor." The 761st Tank Battalion's story forces a confrontation with an uncomfortable truth. The United States military knew black soldiers could fight, knew they were brave, knew they were effective, and still chose to deny them recognition. This was not ignorance. This was not oversight. This was systematic racism. The 761st proved themselves in 183 days of continuous combat. They accomplished everything asked of them. They fought in some of the hardest battles of the war. They liberated concentration camps. And the army responded by minimizing their accomplishments, denying them decorations they earned, and waiting 33 years to give them a unit citation that white battalions received immediately after the war. General Patton, who had initially opposed having black tankers in his army, changed his opinion after seeing the 761st fight. In March 1945, Patton wrote a commendation stating, "The 761st Tank Battalion has fought with courage and determination. They have demonstrated that race has nothing to do with fighting ability. They are excellent soldiers." But Patton's commendation did not result in immediate recognition. The army filed it away. Patton himself never pushed for the 761st to receive the presidential unit citation. He praised them privately but did not fight for them publicly. This was typical of white officers who commanded black units. They would acknowledge competence but not advocate for equality. The men of the 761st understood this. They had spent their lives being told they were inferior, proving they were not, and then watching white society ignore the proof. Military service did not change this pattern. They fought brilliantly. They bled for their country. They proved every racist assumption wrong, and their country responded by treating them as second-class citizens when they returned home and ignoring their service for decades. This was not a failure of individuals. This was a system working as designed. The system was built on white supremacy. The 761st challenged that supremacy. The system responded by erasing them. The 761st story also raises questions about how we remember war. The official histories written immediately after World War II created a narrative of American unity and heroism. But that narrative was selective. It focused on white soldiers. It minimized or ignored the contributions of black soldiers, Japanese American soldiers, and other minorities. This selective memory was not accidental. It was ideological. The people writing the histories believed that the story of American heroism should be a story about white Americans. Black soldiers complicated that narrative. They showed that America's fight for freedom abroad was contradicted by America's denial of freedom at home. The army and the historians who supported it preferred to ignore that contradiction rather than confront it. In recent decades, historians have worked to correct this erasure. Books and films have told the stories of black combat units like the 761st. In 1992, a made-for-TV movie titled The Liberators, fighting on two fronts in World War II, told the story of black tank units, including the 761st, who liberated concentration camps. The film brought wider attention to their service. In 2005, HBO announced a project to produce a miniseries about the 761st, but the project was never completed. In 2020, filmmaker Steven Spielberg's production company began developing a film about the 761st based on the book Brothers in Arms by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. As of this writing, the film has not been released. The 761st story is slowly entering public consciousness, but it remains far less known than the stories of white units. Most surviving members of the 761st are now deceased. The last known survivor, Sgt. Theodore Windsor, died in 2016 at age 96. With their deaths, we lose the direct witnesses to their heroism. What remains are the records after action reports, commendations, witness statements, and the testimony of those they served with and those they liberated. These records tell a clear story. The 761st Tank Battalion was one of the best armored units in the U.S. Army during World War II. They fought longer, in harder conditions, with less recognition than most units. They did everything asked of them and more. They deserve to be remembered not as a footnote in World War II history, but as central to understanding both the war and the struggle for civil rights that followed. The 761st motto was, "Come out fighting." They chose it themselves. It was a declaration of their refusal to accept the limitations placed on them. They came out fighting in France, Belgium, Germany, and Austria. And when they came home, they continued fighting, not with tanks, but with persistence, dignity, and the insistence that their service be recognized. That fight took 33 years to win a Presidential Unit citation and 53 years for Ruben Rivers to receive the Medal of Honor. It should not have taken that long, but the fact that recognition eventually came is because the men of the 761st and their families refused to let their story die. They came out fighting, and they never stopped. If this story made you angry, if it made you question how we remember history, if it made you realize that some heroes have to fight twice, once against the enemy and once for recognition, hit that like button. Share this video with someone who thinks the history they learned in school was complete. Subscribe to this channel because the 761st Tank Battalion is not the only unit whose story was buried, and they all deserve to be told. Drop a comment. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you knew about the 761st before this video. Tell us you were here because the 761st fought for 183 days, liberated concentration camps, proved black soldiers were the equal of any soldiers in the world, and had to wait 33 years for a unit citation and 53 years for their hero to receive the Medal of Honor. America failed them. We won't. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. Come out fighting. That was their motto. Let it be ours too. In the fight to make sure they are never forgotten again.